Welcome to Room 57, where we dive deep into some of the most chilling and mysterious true crime cases. Today, we bring you a story that unfolded in the heart of Meerut, India, a city known for its rich history, but also now marked by one of the most disturbing and bizarre criminal cases of 2025, a case that sent shockwaves across the country, not only for the brutality of the crime, but for the eerie and methodical way in which it was executed. It's a tale of betrayal, obsession, and an attempt to conceal a horrific act in the most gruesome way imaginable. The crime, the discovery of a body stuffed inside a plastic cement drum, a discovery that led to an investigation so dark and twisted that it seemed like something straight out of a crime thriller. But this wasn't fiction, it was real, and the truth was far stranger and more terrifying than anyone could have anticipated. In this episode, we will explore every facet of the case, from the unsettling details of how the body was found to the shocking truth behind the motives of those involved. We'll take you through the investigation, the players in this sordid affair, and the chilling revelations that left the entire country in disbelief. Join us as we take you through the dark corridors of this nightmare, unraveling the mystery of the cement drum murder in Meerut. Part 1, the discovery of the body. A shocking revelation. It was an unassuming morning in Meerut, India, on March 2025. The city, known for its vibrant history and bustling markets, had always seemed far removed from the dark whispers of crime that one might expect from bigger, more infamous urban centers. But on that fateful morning, the quiet routine of a construction crew working on a small renovation project would soon be shattered, marking the beginning of a grisly chapter in Meerut's modern history. The workers were clearing out a section of a residential area, one that was undergoing a large-scale overhaul. It wasn't unusual for debris and old construction materials to pile up in places that had been left untouched for years. What caught their attention, however, was something that seemed out of place among the rubble. A large plastic drum, often used in construction for mixing cement or holding materials. It wasn't the first time they'd seen something like it. These drums were common enough in a construction zone, but this particular drum appeared heavier than usual, its lid slightly ajar and a faint, sickening smell creeping into the air. Initially, the workers shrugged it off. After all, they were used to odd things being dumped in forgotten corners. But something about this drum made one of the workers pause and investigate further. With some effort, he managed to pull the lid off, and there, inside the drum, was a sight that would forever haunt him and the other workers. A body, disfigured and decomposed, wedged inside the container. The gruesome discovery sent chills down their spines. The worker quickly called the police, and within minutes, authorities arrived on the scene. The area was immediately cordoned off as law enforcement began their work. For the officers, the case was unusual. The location was residential, not a place typically associated with such heinous acts, and the method of disposal was nothing short of disturbing. But as they began their investigation, a grim realization dawned. This was no random act of violence. It was a cold, calculated murder, one that was carried out with precision and a chilling sense of planning. Initial identification's victim was soon identified as Saurabh Rajput, a 35-year-old businessman who, until his disappearance, had been living what seemed to be an ordinary life, a family man. Saurabh had owned an electronics store in Meerut and was known to be hardworking and reliable. His sudden disappearance a few days before the discovery of his body had worried his family, but no one expected to find him in such a horrific manner. What stood out initially about Saurabh's case was the lack of a clear motive. There was no evidence of robbery. Saurabh's wallet, phone, and belongings had all been left untouched. His business had been thriving, and while his personal life was not widely discussed, there had been no obvious external conflicts that would indicate why someone would want him dead. As the investigation continued, police began to focus on the people closest to Saurabh. There were no immediate signs of forced entry into his home, and his family hadn't noticed anything particularly suspicious prior to his disappearance. Yet, the more they dug, the more they started to uncover subtle clues pointing to something much darker lurking beneath the surface. The victim's life, the unseen cracks beneath the surface. To understand what led to the brutal end of Saurabh Rajput, investigators had to look into his relationships, especially those within his family and social circles. While Saurabh's life seemed ordinary on the outside, the more the authorities learned about his home life, the more unsettling details emerged. Saurabh was married to Muskaan, a woman who, by all outward appearances, was a loving wife. The couple had a young child, and they lived in a well-maintained home in a respectable part of Meerut. But as investigators began questioning friends and family, they uncovered troubling information that painted a very different picture of their marriage. Muskaan and Saurabh's relationship had been far from perfect. For years, there had been tension between the two, something that their friends had noticed but had not discussed openly. Muskaan, despite her outwardly respectful demeanor, had begun distancing herself from Saurabh in the months leading up to his death. She had spent increasing amounts of time away from home, often without explanation. Her behavior became erratic, and her relationships with some of Saurabh's close friends began to raise eyebrows. The man at the center of this growing storm was Sahil, a family friend who had been spending more and more time with Muskaan. Sahil, a charming and charismatic man, had known the Rajput family for years, but it was only recently that he and Muskaan began to form a close bond. What started as simple gatherings soon evolved into something much more sinister, with their affair blossoming in the shadows of Saurabh's obliviousness. Saurabh's close friends and even his own family had started to suspect something was off. They reported that Muskaan had often seemed distracted and distant, though they couldn't pin down the reason. Even Saurabh himself had noticed her strange behavior, but chose to ignore it, attributing it to stress or personal issues. It wasn't until after his disappearance that the true nature of Muskaan and Sal's relationship came to light. The plot unveiled. Muskaan and Sal's dark chemise investigators pieced together the timeline of events. They discovered that the plot to kill Saurabh had been simmering for weeks. Muskaan and Sahil had been planning his murder meticulously. They knew that Saurabh would never suspect them, and they believed they could dispose of his body in a way that would leave no trace of their involvement. Muskaan, who had grown increasingly resentful of her husband, had come to view him as an obstacle standing in the way of her and Sal's future together. Their plan was simple, but horrific. Muskaan would invite Saurabh over for a quiet dinner, during which Sahil would be waiting. As Saurabh settled in, he would be ambushed by Sahil, knocked unconscious, and subsequently killed. After the murder, they planned to conceal his body in a plastic cement drum. This would allow them to transport it to a remote location and by time before anyone suspected foul play. The choice of the drum was deliberate. Its sealed nature would slow decomposition and make it harder for authorities to detect the cause of death. Their plan, however, would unravel far sooner than they expected. The decision to dispose of Saurabh's body in a public area where it could be discovered was their first fatal mistake. They believed they had covered their tracks, but the decision to keep the body hidden in a location that was both obscure and easy to access would later lead to their downfall. A horrific discovery when the body was found by the workers. The authorities wasted no time linking the crime to Muskaan and Sahil. Their involvement became clear once investigators started speaking to the couple's acquaintances and examining the evidence at the scene. The cement drum, though an effective means of concealing the body, was not without its flaws. The way Saurabh's body had been contorted and stuffed inside, it was a telling sign of the brutal force used during the murder. As the case progressed, Muskaan and Sahil's initial denials crumbled under the weight of the evidence. For Muskaan, the truth was undeniable. She confessed to everything, revealing her affair with Sahil, the planning of her husband's murder, and the chilling details of how they disposed of his body. Sahil, too, admitted his role, though he tried to minimize his involvement, claiming that Muskaan had manipulated him into it. But the truth was out, and the horror of what had occurred in that quiet home in Meerut sent ripples across the country. How could someone so close, someone who had once vowed to share a life together, betray and murder with such coldness? What drove Muskaan and Sahil to commit such a heinous act? Stay tuned for the next part of this story as we explore the chilling details of the investigation, the psychological motives behind the crime, and the aftermath of this devastating betrayal. This part of the episode is designed to set up the murder mystery while laying the foundation for what's to come. It builds intrigue about the victim's life, the relationship dynamics, and the carefully executed crime, keeping the audience hooked for the next sections. Part 2. The life of the victim and the unraveling of the mystery. Saurabh Rajput had always been a well-liked man in Meerut, known for his charisma, hard work, and his seemingly stable family life. He was a man with a bright future, working in a reputable position in a local business. By all accounts, Saurabh had everything going for him until his life took a tragic turn. Saurabh had married Muskaan just a few years earlier, and their union appeared to be a happy one. The couple lived in a modest but comfortable home, and their life seemed to be like that of many others, full of promise, love, and plans for the future. They had a baby on the way, and friends often described them as the picture of domestic bliss. Yet, as in many stories of betrayal, things were not as they seemed. Muskaan had always been a private person, someone who kept to herself and rarely opened up about her feelings. However, over the course of their marriage, friends began to notice a shift in her behavior. She seemed increasingly distant from Saurabh, and they began to speculate about the strain that came with the pressures of raising a family and the growing demands of their careers. But the tension in their marriage went much deeper than just the usual strains of everyday life. The truth, as it would later be revealed, was far darker. Muskaan had been harboring an affair with a close family friend, Sahil, a man who had long been a part of Saurabh's inner circle. The relationship between Muskaan and Sahil began innocently enough, with Sahil often coming over to visit the family. He had known Saurabh for years, and his close relationship with both Saurabh and Muskaan allowed him to blend in seamlessly. Within their household, Sahil was charming and to many. He was the kind of man you could rely on, someone who had the ability to make others feel at ease. However, under the surface, his presence had started to cause ripples in the Rajput family dynamic. He had become a confidant to Muskaan, someone she turned to for support, especially as her marriage began to feel strained. Over time, this emotional bond evolved into a more intimate relationship. What began as a friendship turned into a full-fledged affair, and Muskaan found herself trapped in a complicated web of guilt, passion, and deception. Saurabh, however, remained oblivious to his wife's infidelity for much of their marriage. He continued to trust Sahil, believing him to be a loyal friend. The two men would often talk about business, life, and their families, unaware that the very person they considered a close friend was the one betraying them both. Muskaan's deception was not something she took lightly, but her actions soon spiraled out of control, and the guilt began to eat away at her as time went on. The affair became more than just a guilty secret. It became a crisis in Muskaan's life. She found herself torn between two men: her husband, the father of her unborn child, and Sahil, the man who had captured her heart and filled the emotional void that her marriage could no longer fulfill. The stress and strain of hiding the affair began to take a toll on her health and mental well-being. Muskaan had always been a quiet person, but now she became more distant, brooding, and withdrawn. Saurabh, despite his busy work life, began to notice the change in his wife. At first, he chalked it up to the pressures of pregnancy and the inevitable challenges that come with starting a family. He tried to be supportive, showering Muskaan with affection and encouragement, but it was clear that something was amiss. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he sensed the distance growing between them. The couple's marriage, once full of hope and excitement, was now faltering, and at the heart of it all, Muskaan's affair with Sahil had become the silent force, driving a wedge between them. The affair was no longer a secret to Muskaan and Sahil alone. It was now the silent specter, looming over her every move. As time passed, her guilt began to transform into resentment, as she found herself resenting Saurabh for being in the way of her relationship with Sahil. By the time Saurabh began to suspect something was wrong, it was too late. Muskaan had already made a decision that would change everything. One evening, after a heated argument with Saurabh, Muskaan confided in Sahil. Desperate and overwhelmed by the mounting pressure, she turned to him for guidance. They both knew that things couldn't continue as they were. Saurabh had started to ask more questions about her whereabouts, and their interactions had become more strained. The tension between them was palpable, and Muskaan realized that her life was about to implode. In Sahil, Muskaan found an ally. Together, they concocted a plan that they believed would be the only way out of the complicated mess they had created. They were convinced that they could escape the repercussions of their actions by silencing Saurabh permanently. The plan was ruthless, cold-blooded, and calculated. They both knew what they were doing was wrong, but at this point, it no longer mattered. What had begun as an affair had now evolved into a life-altering decision, a decision to take a life. On the night of Saurabh's tragic murder, Muskaan played her part perfectly. She led Saurabh to believe everything was normal, that they were just another married couple facing the challenges of life together. But as Saurabh relaxed, unaware of the deadly plan his wife and friend had hatched, Muskaan and Sahil executed their brutal scheme. The method they chose was nothing short of chilling. After subduing Saurabh, they placed his body in a large plastic container and filled it with cement. This gruesome disposal method was designed to ensure that no one would find him, that no one would be able to identify the body. In the days that followed, Muskaan and Sahil went about their lives as if nothing had happened. They carried on as though the murder had never taken place, pretending that Saurabh was simply missing. But little did they know, their gruesome secret was about to unravel. As the investigation began, the authorities started to piece together the puzzle. The discovery of Saurabh's body in the cement drum would mark the beginning of the end for Muskaan and Sahil. What had started as a betrayal in the quiet corners of their lives would soon become a shocking crime that would send shockwaves throughout Meerut and beyond. The investigation would soon reveal the twisted truth behind Saurabh's murder, the carefully crafted alibis, the lack of emotion, and the telltale signs of manipulation would be the key to solving this horrific crime. The love triangle that had led to murder was about to be exposed for the world to see, as the lives of Muskaan, Sahil, and Saurabh would be forever entangled in the web of a tragic and brutal tale. In the next part of this series, we will dive into the investigation that brought Muskaan and Sahil to justice. Stay tuned for the shocking details of how the authorities uncovered the grisly truth behind Saurabh Rajput's death and the chilling confessions that followed. Part 3. The investigation piecing together the puzzled murder of Saurabh Rajput set shockwaves through Meerut, but as the initial panic faded, the investigation began in earnest. The case, which seemed like a straightforward missing persons inquiry at first, soon began to reveal darker, more twisted layers. It would be the meticulous work of the investigators that would bring the gruesome truth to light. The investigation started with a report of Saurabh's disappearance. Muskaan, his wife, filed the report claiming that he had gone missing after leaving the house for an evening walk. She said he hadn't returned, as she feared something had happened to him. On the surface, it seemed plausible. A husband had simply gone missing, an all too common occurrence. But as detectives began to probe further into the case, they soon found inconsistencies in Muskaan's story. Initially, the investigation was hindered by the lack of physical evidence and the family's lack of cooperation. Muskaan's calm demeanor during the early stages of the investigation raised eyebrows. She remained composed, almost too composed, for someone whose husband had just gone missing. There was no panic in her voice, no signs of distress when speaking to the police. As the investigation progressed, her behavior would become a crucial part of the puzzle. The unsettling discovery breakthrough in the case came when Saurabh's body was found. A tip-off from an anonymous source led the authorities to a secluded area on the outskirts of Meerut, where they discovered a large plastic drum. The drum was buried under some debris in a deserted lot, and at first, the investigators thought it might be just an abandoned container. But as they began to dig deeper, they made a chilling discovery. When the drum was finally opened, the stench of decaying flesh filled the air. Inside, they found a body submerged in concrete. The victim had been partially dismembered, and the body was barely recognizable, with only a few distinguishing features remaining. The body was soon identified as that of Saurabh Rajput. His face, though battered, was still identifiable, and DNA samples confirmed his identity. The investigators were horrified by the brutality of the crime. The fact that Saurabh had been disposed of in such a methodical and disturbing way, encased in cement and left to rot, indicated that the killer had taken deliberate steps to ensure that the crime would be hidden for good. But what was the motive? And more importantly, who had committed such an atrocious act? The investigation turns inward. The police initially focused on Saurabh's family and close circle of friends. Muskaan, as his wife, was the first person to come under suspicion. Her calm demeanor, combined with the fact that she had reported the disappearance, made her an obvious person of interest. Muskaan had claimed that Saurabh had left the house for a walk, but there was no evidence to support this story. She also appeared unfazed by the discovery of her husband's body, which struck the detectives as odd. Her statements were inconsistent, and there were small details that didn't add up. The investigators decided to dig deeper into Muskaan's personal life and relationship with her husband. As they began to question friends and family members, a disturbing pattern emerged. It became clear that the couple's marriage had been in trouble for some time. Several people reported that Muskaan had been acting strangely in the days leading up to Saurabh's disappearance. She had seemed distracted, almost as if she were hiding something. There were also rumors about her relationship with Sahil, a close family friend who had been spending a lot of time at the Rajput household. Muskaan's affair with Sahil, once a secret, was now common knowledge among those close to the family. Investigators spoke with Sahil's acquaintances and confirmed that he had been in a relationship with Muskaan for several months. As the puzzle pieces began to fit together, the investigators began to suspect that Sahil might be involved in the murder. The role of Sahil's involvement in the murder became clearer as the investigation continued. Muskaan and Sahil had been in contact in the days leading up to Saurabh's disappearance, and their communication became a crucial element in the case. They had been secretly planning the murder, and it became increasingly apparent that the affair had escalated into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Sahil was brought in for questioning. He initially denied any involvement in Saurabh's murder, but the evidence against him was mounting. Phone records showed frequent communication between him and Muskaan on the night of Saurabh's disappearance. Furthermore, his whereabouts were unaccounted for during the critical time period when Saurabh was killed. Sahil had a history of manipulation, and his relationship with Muskaan seemed to have fueled his actions. He had been part of the plan to kill Saurabh and dispose of his body in the most macabre manner possible. As investigators delved into Sahil's background, they found that he had a criminal record. He had been involved in a few minor legal issues in the past, but nothing that could have prepared the authorities for the cold-blooded nature of his crime. Sahil had been planning Saurabh's murder for months, knowing that the only way he could be with Muskaan was if Saurabh was out of the picture. The affair had led him to believe that Saurabh was a hindrance to his future with Muskaan, and he took the drastic step of eliminating him altogether. The breakthrough in the investigation came when investigators found concrete evidence linking both Muskaan and Sahil to the crime. Forensic analysis of the cement drum revealed traces of both Muskaan's and Sahil's fingerprints. This damning evidence, combined with the testimonies of witnesses who had seen Sahil in the area, was enough to bring them both into custody. Muskaan was arrested first, and during her interrogation, she broke down and confessed to the crime. She admitted to conspiring with Sahil to murder Saurabh, describing how they had lured him into a false sense of security before attacking him. She explained that the murder had been planned out meticulously, with the goal of making it look like a disappearance. The use of the plastic drum and cement had been a deliberate choice to ensure that Saurabh's body would never be discovered. Muskaan's confession shocked many who had known her as a quiet, reserved woman with the perfect family life. Her motivations for murder were as complex as they were chilling her affair with Sahil had consumed her, and in her mind, killing her husband was the only way out. Her betrayal of Saurabh, who had loved and trusted her, was not just a matter of passion. It was about her own survival. As she saw it, she had allowed her emotions to cloud her judgment, leading her down a path that ended in tragedy. Sahil, too, was arrested after Muskaan's confession. He initially denied any involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. His fingerprints, his communication with Muskaan, and his behavior in the days following Saurabh's disappearance all pointed to his role in the murder. As he was interrogated, he, too, confessed to his part in the crime, revealing the full extent of their plan. The aftermath arrest and subsequent confessions of Muskaan and Sahil brought a sense of closure to the case, but it also left a trail of devastation. The Rajput family, once united, was now torn apart by betrayal and violence. Saurabh's family was left to grapple with the unimaginable loss of their loved one, who had been murdered by the woman he had trusted most. The shock of Muskaan's involvement in her husband's death reverberated throughout the community, and many were left questioning how someone so close to Saurabh could commit such a heinous act. Muskaan and Sahil were both charged with murder and conspiracy. Their trial, which captivated the attention of the public, would eventually lead to convictions for both individuals. The case served as a grim reminder of the lengths to which some people would go for love, money, and personal desires. It was a tragedy that was marked by betrayal, deception, and ultimately murder. In the next part of this series, we will delve deeper into the trial, examining the psychological profiles of Muskaan and Sahil and how their motivations were dissected by experts. Stay tuned for a deeper look at the aftermath of this tragic crime and the lasting impact it has had on everyone involved. Part 4. The Trial. Unraveling the minds behind the crime. As the investigation into the brutal murder of Saurabh Rajput reached its conclusion with the arrest of Muskaan and Sahil, the case shifted to the courtroom. The trial of Muskaan and Sahil captivated the public's attention as the chilling details of their crime unfolded in the judicial system. The courtroom would become a stage where not only the facts of the murder would be revealed, but also the disturbing psychology behind the motives of the two perpetrators. The courtroom drama trial began with the formal charges being murder, conspiracy, and the desecration of a body. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as the prosecution and defense lawyers prepared to present their cases. The prosecution, armed with damning evidence from the investigation including fingerprints, phone records, and forensic analysis, was confident in its ability to secure convictions. The defense, on the other hand, would attempt to argue that both Muskaan and Sahil were products of emotional turmoil, and that mitigating factors like passion and manipulation played a role in their actions. Muskaan's role in the murder was indisputable. She had confessed to the crime and provided detailed accounts of how she and Sahil had conspired to kill her husband. However, the prosecution needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the crime had been premeditated, and that Muskaan's actions were not just the result of temporary emotional distress, but rather a calculated decision to end her husband's life for personal gain. Sal's role and motivation. Sal's involvement was perhaps even more chilling, as he had been the one to act as the catalyst for the crime. During the trial, his defense team attempted to portray him as someone who had been manipulated by Muskaan, suggesting that he was merely a pawn in her scheme. They argued that Sahil had been in love with Muskaan and was coerced into committing the murder as a way of securing a future with her. However, the prosecution was quick to dismantle this argument. They presented evidence that Sahil had been fully aware of the gravity of his actions and had willingly participated in the murder. The phone records showed that Sahil had been the one to initiate many of the conversations with Muskaan regarding the crime, planning the details of the murder. Meticulously, he was not an innocent bystander caught up in a passionate affair. He was an active participant, driven by his own desires and his own lack of moral compass. Sal's psychological profile became a key point of discussion during the trial. Psychologists and criminal experts were brought in to assess his behavior and motivations. The experts concluded that Sahil had characteristics of a manipulator, a person who was willing to exploit others for his own benefit. His relationship with Muskaan had taken on an obsessive nature, and he was willing to murder to achieve his goals. Unlike Muskaan, who seemed to be driven by a deep-seated need for love and escape from her own feelings of entrapment, Sahil's motives appeared more rooted in a desire for power and control. Muskaan's psychological profile, the tragic picture of a woman driven to murder, while Sahil's role was clearer from the outset. Muskaan's involvement was more complex and emotionally charged. During the trial, the defense team focused on her psychological state at the time of the crime, arguing that Muskaan's actions were influenced by intense emotional pressure and the affair with Sahil. They painted a picture of a woman who had been emotionally abused by her husband and who had resorted to extreme measures in a bid to escape her troubled marriage. The prosecution, however, argued that Muskaan's actions were deliberate and premeditated. They presented evidence showing that she had carefully planned the murder, taking steps to ensure that the body would be disposed of in a way that would delay its discovery. The fact that she had lured Saurabh to a secluded area, and her subsequent calmness in the days after his disappearance, painted a stark picture of someone who had planned the crime with cold efficiency. Psychologists who examined Muskaan concluded that she exhibited traits of a person who was deeply dissatisfied with her life and felt trapped by her circumstances. Her affair with Sahil, they argued, had been an attempt to find freedom and love outside her marriage, and the murder was a misguided attempt to create a new life for herself. However, unlike Sahil, Muskaan's psychological motivations were not driven by a desire for power, but by a desperate need to escape the confines of her relationship with Saurabh. Her actions, while deeply irrational and violent, were seen by some as stemming from emotional desperation rather than a malicious intent to harm. However, this emotional explanation did not absolve Muskaan of responsibility for her actions. Her decision to kill her husband, combined with her detailed planning and eventual cover-up, indicated a level of premeditation that could not be dismissed. The court was forced to weigh her emotional state against the severity of her crime, and whether or not she had acted with enough forethought to qualify her actions as murder in the first degree. The victim's family, a grief that would never end. Only of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Saurabh's family took the stand. His parents and siblings spoke about their grief, the shock of losing Saurabh in such a brutal manner, and their feelings of betrayal by Muskaan, who they had once trusted as a daughter-in-law. The emotional toll on the family was palpable, as they recounted the loss of their son and brother in the most horrific of ways. Saurabh's family described how they had always seen him as a kind, hard-working man who had been devoted to his wife and family. To learn that Muskaan, the woman he had trusted the most, was behind his murder was a blow that left the family shattered. The trial was not just a legal proceeding for them. It was a painful reminder of the life that had been stolen from them, a life that had been full of potential but ended abruptly by betrayal and violence. For Saurabh's family, the trial was about more than just seeking justice. It was about coming to terms with the fact that someone so close to them could commit such a heinous act. It was also about making sure that Muskaan and Sahil were held accountable for their crime, so that no other family would have to experience the same kind of loss. The verdict, justice or mercy. After weeks of intense testimony, the trial reached its conclusion. The defense made one final push for leniency. Citing Muskaan's emotional state and Sahil's supposed manipulation by her, they asked the court to consider the emotional turmoil both defendants had endured leading up to the murder, but the prosecution remained firm, insisting that justice could only be served if both Muskaan and Sahil were convicted for their roles in Saurabh's murder. On the final day of the trial, the judge delivered the verdict. Muskaan was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy, as well as desecration of a body. Sahil was convicted of the same charges, with the added weight of his manipulation and premeditation in the crime. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the verdict brought some closure to Saurabh's family, the pain of the loss would never truly fade. The trial had served as a reminder that even the most seemingly perfect relationships could be hiding dark secrets, and that betrayal, when combined with passion and a desire for escape, can lead to the most horrific of outcomes. Conclusion: a legacy. A betrayal and murder case of Saurabh Rajput, Muskaan, and Sahil is one that will haunt the city of Meerut for years to come. It serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human emotion and the tragic consequences of unchecked desires. For Saurabh's family, the trial and conviction of Muskaan and Sahil will never bring him back, but it does offer a sense of justice. In the end, the trial unraveled the dark psychology behind the murder to people consumed by their own desires and driven by a misguided sense of love and escape. The consequences of their actions will echo for the rest of their lives, but for Saurabh's family, the only true justice is the memory of a man whose life was stolen by those he trusted most. Part 5. The Aftermath. Lives forever changed, and lessons learned. The conviction of Muskaan and Sahil brought a semblance of justice to the tragic and brutal murder of Saurabh Rajput. However, the long-lasting impact of the crime extends far beyond the courtroom. For Saurabh's family, the pain of losing him in such a shocking and senseless manner will never truly heal. The memory of Saurabh, a man whose life was taken too soon, lingers as a reminder of the depths of betrayal and the destructive consequences of impulsive, violent decisions. But the aftermath of this crime is not just about the victims. It is also about the criminals, the lives of Muskaan and Sahil, that were forever altered by their own choices. The tragedy is one of shattered relationships, broken trust, and lives destroyed by a single, irreversible act. Saurabh's family. A journey of grief and healing. The aftermath for Saurabh's family has been an ongoing journey of grief and healing. The trial, while offering a form of justice, cannot erase the pain they carry with them. The family of the victim often expressed that no punishment, no verdict, could bring Saurabh back or fill the void left by his absence. Despite this, the verdict did offer them a sense of closure. For them, it was not just about seeing Muskaan and Sahil behind bars. It was about knowing that Saurabh's death was not in vain, and that the criminals who took his life would face the consequences of their actions. As the years go by, the family continues to carry the emotional scars. Saurabh's parents are left to grapple with the realization that the woman they had once trusted, who had been a part of their family, was responsible for their son's death. For them, the sense of betrayal is even more profound. The trial was a painful reminder of the life they lost, and they now must live with the haunting knowledge that someone so close to them was capable of such an act of violence. While they may never fully recover from the loss, Saurabh's family has come to understand that healing will be a slow and painful process. Their focus now is on remembering the good times they shared with Saurabh, cherishing his memory, and raising awareness about the importance of recognizing toxic relationships and the potential dangers they can harbor. The impact on Muskaan and Sahil's lives, too, have been irrevocably changed by their actions. For Muskaan, the reality of a life behind bars became a harsh consequence of her choices. The once aspiring woman, who had dreamt of a future with Sahil, found herself condemned to a life of confinement, living with the knowledge that her relationship with him had been based on violence, manipulation, and betrayal. Her role in the murder of her husband, driven by her desire for freedom and love, ultimately left her shackled in a prison of her own making. The psychological toll of the crime, combined with the public outcry and the heavy sentence, will likely remain with her for the rest of her life. The guilt and remorse that Muskaan may feel are difficult to fathom, but in the long run, she will have to confront the horror of the life she destroyed, her own, Sahil's. And most tragically, Saurabh's dies for Sahil. His initial excitement about starting a new life with Muskaan was quickly shattered as he was sentenced to life imprisonment. His obsessive behavior and manipulation were key factors in this gruesome crime, and his involvement in it has sealed his fate. He is left with nothing but the bitter reality that his attempt to secure a future through violence has led him to a life devoid of freedom and any meaningful connection. In the courtroom, both Muskaan and Sahil showed little remorse or emotion during the trial, which only further emphasized the cold, calculated nature of their crime. But in the prison cells they now occupy, they will have time to reflect on the choices they made and the irreversible damage they caused to so many people. Their sentences may be a reflection of the justice system, but they also serve as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise from betrayal, manipulation, and the dangerous fusion of love and obsession. A final reflection, lessons in trust, betrayal, and justice. The murder of Saurabh Rajput is not just a case about a man's tragic death. It is a reminder of the fragile nature of trust, the consequences of emotional manipulation, and the devastating effects of betrayal. It serves as a warning to us all about the danger of toxic relationships and the need to recognize when love turns into obsession, and when personal desires push people to commit unspeakable acts. The case also raises questions about the justice system's role in dealing with crimes of passion and manipulation. How do we measure the intent behind such brutal acts? How do we balance the need for punishment with an understanding of the psychological factors that drive people to commit such crimes? These are complex questions that justice systems around the world must grapple with. In the end, the murder of Saurabh Rajput is a tragedy on multiple levels: the loss of life, the destruction of a family, and the irreversible transformation of two young lives that were consumed by violence. For Saurabh's family, the pain of his loss will never fully subside, but the knowledge that justice was served may bring them some solace. For Muskaan and Sahil, the long-term consequences of their actions will stay with them forever, as they reflect on their choices and face their future behind bars. The lessons learned from this case are clear: betrayal, obsession, and violence leave behind scars that can never truly heal. What do you think about the complex psychological factors that led to the tragic murder of Saurabh Rajput? Do you believe Muskaan and Sahil's actions were driven purely by love and manipulation, or were there deeper issues at play? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If you found this case intriguing and thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Room 57 for more in-depth explorations into real-life crimes and the dark psychology behind them. Stay tuned for more gripping true crime stories and deep dives into the minds of criminals. Thank you for watching and being part of our journey to understand the complexities of justice, betrayal, and the human psyche.